Okay, for this Bloomberg Lab assignment, we are going to create a 5-year historical ROIC tree. We're going to do analysis on that tree for operating ROIC, and we're going to create 3 components. We're going to do the end of year ROIC. Therefore, we're going to look at the 3 drivers of that end of year ROIC. So we'll estimate a tax rate. We'll get the pre-tax ROIC. We'll have the operating margin, which is operating income or EBIT divided by revenue. And then we'll have operating invested capital divided by sales to measure productivity. So we'll have all the data for the 3 drivers of the tree. And then we'll look at a 5-year change in ROIC and look at the drivers to explain why. So in order to do that, we're going to need to get the data for the tree. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the custom part of FA to get just the data we need, so that rather than exporting full income statements and balance sheets in a standardized format from Bloomberg, I'm going to show you how to just get the fields that you want to export and create a saved template so that you can make this a repeatable process. So, assuming we're logged into Bloomberg, let's get started. So the company that we're going to use as an example is Dow Chemical. So I'll type in the ticker symbol, DOW, US Equity, and this will bring me to the main Dow Chemical screen. What I'll then do is I'll click on FA for financial analysis or type the short code FA to go to the FA screen. Financial analysis is historical financial statements on a company. So it is here where we can get historical income statement, balance sheet, cash flow, and other data from the 10Ks and 10Q. But what we're about to do is we're going to go to the custom area to get customized data so we don't necessarily get any data that we don't need. But before we do, we're going to set up for an Excel export so it exports in a format that will be useful to us. So I'm going to click on the settings button here, and it's going to pop up a menu to get my export settings. So first, on fundamentals, your default may not have it this way. So basically, you want to make sure that you have periods, 6 periods. So if it's not 6, change it to 6. Annual periodicity, we can leave the T12 periodicity for supported templates. Make sure that's not checked. Filing status, most recent, and standardized. Then on the data tab, growth rows, growth columns, none. We want to make sure none of these 4 boxes are checked. So if any of those are checked, uncheck those. In display, Bloomberg default, reporting currency. This is very important. The default is descending. Make sure you change this to ascending. So that means that the most current year will be on the right and the older years will be on the left. And then we're going to use commas, right? And then for reporting in Excel, we're going to report in a table format, and we'll start each section on a new page, right? And we'll export as, in this case, instead of formula, we're going to export it as a value. So again, from an export perspective, if we wanted to make this a reusable template, we could click on formula. But the one challenge with that is that you'd have to have a Bloomberg terminal. Otherwise, when you open up Excel and you leave the lab, you won't be able to actually see the data because it will constantly be referring back to the database. So for this exercise, we're going to export as value, which is just going to give us the numbers. Make sure we don't have any of these reference items or segmentation data checked. Click on Update, and we're now ready to do our export. All right, come over here to Custom. So Custom, and I have a few templates already set up, allows us to pick and choose which variables we want to export. So what I've done for you in this Excel template is I'm showing you which fields we are going to want to export here. So these are the actual database names, and these are the names that you'll see when you export. So we'll start out with revenue. So I can either type in revenue or I can type in the database name, sales rev turnover. So start typing in sales underscore rev for sales revenue turnover, and it would add this to my field. Except what I'm going to do is, instead of using a template that I already have, I'm going to create a custom template. So I don't want to save the template there. Sorry, you should actually start with the save template. So with the save template, custom template, you can actually create your own template. So back to this, Same process. I want to do sales rev turn, so sales underscore rev, and there it is. Hit enter or go, and then there are the 6 historical years for sales revenue and turnover. All right, next, I'm going to want operating income. So IS is income statement underscore oper income. So IS underscore oper underscore inc. Make sure I get that right. IS underscore oper underscore inc. And that will be my operating income. It's the Bloomberg field. Okay. Next, I'm going to want my pre-tax income. So we could start typing in pre-tax income. Next, I'm going to want my income tax expense, which again is IS underscore inc underscore tax expense. IS underscore inc underscore tax expense. All right. Next, we're going to want accounts and notes receivable, which is from the balance sheet BS ACCT. So BS underscore ACCT, and I want notes receivable. And then the next one I'm going to want is inventories, which again will be BS inventories, or again I could just type in inventories and it will also search that number. Okay. Next, other current assets. So again, I can either type in other current assets, or I could type in the database field. Next, I'm going to need net fixed assets. Net fixed assets, which is BS underscore goodwill. Just make sure I get the right field. Underscore goodwill. Next, I'm going to need accounts payable. And finally, other short-term liabilities. So BS underscore other. And again, you can go back between typing the name and let it filter. Where's it? BS other underscore, or you can use the database field, which is probably more exact. So I'll get other short-term liabilities. Okay, so with these numbers, we will be able to create a NOPLAT. We will be able to create the effective tax rate, and we will be able to create the concept of operating invested capital. So what I'm going to next do is I'm going to save my template so that I can reuse it, and I'm going to call this the ROICtree data template. Okay. So you'll notice that this is now a template that I could click on for any company, right? And I now have it for Dow Chemical. So my next step is to export the data. So now I would click on Output, and I'll output to Excel the current template, which I'm on the ROICtree, and then it's going to pop up Excel. Now, here's the thing, very important. When you see Excel, the security message, you must say yes to the security message. If you don't say yes to the security message, nothing will happen. Microsoft will always give you a security warning every time you export from Bloomberg. You must say yes. Okay, and then it'll dump the data into Excel. Now, one word of note on the workstations in the lab, because they use VMware, and every time the workstation is rebooted, it essentially resets everything. You will have to go into the menu, into the Bloomberg. So my computer is in a different place. But if you go to Programs and you go to Bloomberg, there is an option here to install the Office add-ins for Bloomberg, and specifically to install the Excel add-in. And every time that that machine is rebooted, you'll have to install the Office add-in. So if it doesn't have this behavior and it gives you an error and it won't actually load the data, then you probably need to install the Office add-in to Bloomberg and then try this process again. Right? So very important process. So again, here I have the data for Dow Chemical, and because I chose to output it as values, I basically have the data in values. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this exported template, and I'll put it on my downloads folder or someplace where you can get it. I'll call it Dow Data. Actually, let's call it Data. And I'll save it as an Excel workbook, and I'll save it on my hard drive. Now, if I go back to my Excel file here, I now have my data from Excel. Probably got to quit out of the Windows version. Get to the Mac version, so quit out of that. Go back to my Windows Excel, open up my Excel file, and I have my Bloomberg ROICtree data. Okay, so that is the data that we exported with the column names. Now, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to basically put this data into this spreadsheet. Now, I can do a couple ways. I can copy and paste it in. I can also right-click, move or copy, move it to the workbook, ROIC data. I'll put it here before my ROIC drivers data, and I now have the Dow Chemical data as a new tab in my Bloomberg ROICtree Excel file. So, my last step, make it a little bit bigger so it's easier to see, is I need to calculate NOPLAT, tax rate, operating invested capital. So NOPLAT, tax rate, and operating invested capital. All right, so tax rate. Basically what I do is I take my pre-tax income and my income tax expense and I do some division. So if I take my income tax expense divided by my pre-tax income, then that would be the effective tax rate that they're paying for that period of time. If I want to calculate my NOPLAT, equals my operating income times 1 minus the tax rate. And this place, I'll get rid of the decimal places just to make it easier to see. All right, and then finally I need to calculate my operating invested capital. So here's the assumption we're going to make for operating cash. We're going to use 2% of revenue, which was one of the options talked about in the book. So to calculate operating invested capital, equals, left paren, revenue times 0.02. And then I'm going to add in the operating assets. In this case, I got my operating cash plus receivables, accounts and notes receivable, plus inventory, plus other current assets, plus net fixed assets, plus goodwill, minus accounts payable, minus other short-term liabilities. So very quickly, we have an estimate for operating invested capital. Again, make this comma, get rid of the decimal places. So what I'll do is just copy this over, and I now have my data for the 6 years. All right, so in this case, my last step is to go to the tree and to create the tree. So I have my end of year ROIC, which is NOPLAT divided by invested capital. I have my tax rate. There's my tax rate. I then have my pre-tax ROIC, which I have my pre-tax ROIC would be the operating income divided by the invested capital. So I could quickly calculate that operating margin, which is my operating income. Sorry, make sure I said this right. My pre-tax ROIC is my operating income divided by invested capital. And then my operating margin is my operating income divided by my revenue. And finally, my invested capital over sales equals operating invested capital divided by revenue. So I have all of the components to create the tree, and I'm now ready to create the tree. So that is going to be your assignment. You then, once you get to this step, you must create the tree, fill in all these numbers, and then you must analyze the tree and talk specifically about why ROIC changed between 2009 and 2013. And you must talk about it in terms of the three key drivers: the tax rate, the operating margin, and the productivity, and how those influence that changed. That is your Bloomberg Lab assignment.